It's one of those days.
Hmm?
Just laugh about those things. Like, see
Yeah.
what happens when real life and Zoom mix together. I think looks like we're mostly at home. So, anywho, okay.
Shall we go for it? Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Provocations, Conversations, Iterations series. This is the second series, and it is part of the, oh, okay, sorry, lost my train of thought. Try that again. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Provocations, Conversations, Iterations series. This is part of the ongoing Provocations Project, which is facilitated by John MacCallum, Jessica Rajko, and myself, Teoma Naccarato. And this project began several years ago. We've launched open calls for provocations on different questions, often related to movement and computing. And right now for this series, the idea is that we would like to bring together provocateurs, those who have submitted provocations, together to discuss their provocations. The guiding question that we're going to be discussing today is, what aspects of your practice or research are invisible to your collaborators? This is presently part of Slow MoCo, which is the extended format of the Conference on Movement and Computing. And we will begin by asking each of the provocateurs to share a little about their provocation and then enter into open conversation. So we're thrilled to have here with us today Daniel Lichtman and Sarah Fdili Alaoui. So I'll hand it over to Daniel to begin.
Thank you. So I'm gonna, maybe I'll share, can I share my screen and just read my provocation? Oh no, I don't have permission to share my screen. Sorry, this is a new computer. Okay, I'll just read it. So, and I'll give some background for just a minute. This provocation is kind of loosely related to a project I'm working on called the Raisin Truck Makes Raisins, which is a collaboratively produced virtual environment and kind of 3D virtual environment and game that loosely reflects on the experience of raising young children during the pandemic, during lockdown, during a period of social isolation, but it's very, it does so using visual abstraction and collage of kind of drawings and photos and other 2D materials in 3D space. So it's kind of a very loose reflection on the idea of raising children during the pandemic. So I'll just read my provocation. Dear R&S, I'm reaching out to see if you would be open to helping me with something quick. I really appreciate the personal nature of the material I'm asking you to consider sharing with me. It's pretty humble, but I do hope that I am trying to make something that opens up a bit of a space for solidarity. And if this feels right to you, I would credit you in T. Of course, it's fine to be anonymous too. I also really don't want to ask you to spend more than 5 minutes gathering and emailing me some bits that resonate with what we've talked about and that you feel comfortable to share. For example, I made the drawings of V in 1 to 2 minutes, took snaps of W's artwork, and spent about 1 to 2 minutes scrolling through photos of X and Y on my phone. See video above. Kiss Z. And there's like a 1-minute video, but don't seem to be able to share my screen right now.
I opened it up. I just double check because I did open up share screen. So.
Oh, I think it's, oh wait, I think I can just give my computer permission. 1 second. I have to quit Zoom. Tell you what if I put the link in? Can someone else just share it?
Sure,
I think
I can do that.
Beyond my 2 minutes, but there it is.
Give me just one moment. I am going to share my screen and I will play it. Oops, let's try that again. There.
Oh, maybe do sound also.
Oh, is it not doing sound?
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on just a moment. All right, let me just try.
You
Probably
may
just
have to
stop
restart
sharing and
sharing
share
and
again.
check the sound button.
It's playing on mine, so
You have to press the button that says share computer sound.
in addition to just share screen.
Yeah. It's on
I
the
see.
it's
Yep,
on the
that's
bottom of that little window.
Yep, got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry, friends, I have multiple screens here, so it's just a little bit. Okay. Let's try that again.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we pass to Sarah now.
Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to read perhaps my provocation 3 years back. I think it was a very short one. And I said there that what aspect of my practice and research that is invisible to my collaborators is the value system, the format, the constraints, the language, the interests, and the focus of my other discipline that is not theirs. So that goes for a little bit of context that goes both ways, both for the dancers and artists I work with, or for the researchers, engineers, and even the admins, basically, of the university where I work that collaborate with me and allow me to advance my project. So basically, for both of these communities in which I navigate and in which I exist, or maybe in between which I exist, I think that what escaped my other side or my other practice is all of these value system, format, constraints, language, interests, and focus of my other discipline. I think this is still actually it's still relevant today. Yeah, I could definitely discuss some aspects of these.
And it's the moment we can then enter into some questions that you have for one another.
I can start. I'd love to just get a little more context, like what disciplines. It sounds like you're talking about disciplines that you work on, people, your collaborators coming from different contexts and working in different fields, and that because they're working in different fields, they're not privy to or aware of the structures and constraints and limitations of the field that you work in. So maybe can we hear a little bit about what those fields are for you and for these other people that you work with?
Yeah, basically, I work in the intersection of dance and interactive technologies. So I do build creative art that actually live in the realm of dance and performance. And in that space, I actually collaborate with dancers, other choreographers, curators, and people around the world of dance and performance. On the other hand, I'm a professor or associate professor in human-computer interaction design, in a computer science department in a science university, in a department where usually people basically buy computers and create algorithms. And so the culture, the academic culture in which I am in is very far from the nature of the work that I produce. That being said, I'm in a very supportive environment. However, it's an environment that is not built around the type of work I could produce. Very simple examples go around, needs of like paying performers or renting studios or touring, which is absolutely not aligned with how the administration or the institution in the university is made, which usually is built around basically traveling to conferences in the context of a computer science department, buying computers, having PhD students or master's students around. So it's just like there are some very concrete kind of like miscommunications around disciplines that do not know each other, institutions that are built around specific practices and perhaps that can't afford the type of openness to other types of disciplines meandering around, or transdisciplinarity, basically, which poses these kind of questions. And that's not even to talk about the fact that when you're doing a project that actually builds at the intersection of these both communities, then you beyond the concrete constraints or the concrete miscommunication, then you have people around who don't have the same goals, who could be working together or perhaps working for each other, or perhaps using another person's work to value some type of work in a different field, and that becomes more of a interdisciplinary kind of conflict of focuses, interests, and even value system, and kind of like whose goal is ultimately the most important or the most valuable, etc. So you have kind of layers of invisibility or miscommunication, or just like belonging to different worlds at different level, from the very basic level of like the administration of this kind of works, to the semantics and the languages that are used, to more how to not instrumentalize each other's work and to benefit all communities or both communities equally. Is that even possible? So I think that's what's underneath my provocation there, just like underlying all of the layers in which you can see that people can not communicate or dominate each other or instrumentalize each other. Yeah. On the other hand, maybe perhaps I could loop it around the provocation that you'd proposed. Could you maybe explain the motivation behind kind of bringing it to the realm of an artwork, proposing an artwork that, if I understand well, that's talking about bringing up children during pandemics? Is that, and how is that actually, how's that actually highlighting this idea of invisibility and collaboration?
Well, the provocation, the text of the provocation was kind of like a a version of a message to people asking them to contribute material for this project. And I guess, I felt kind of, I felt like when I was reaching out to people, the way I did it was a kind of sense, sort of a sensitive matter, because I'm kind of asking for people to contribute, photos and drawings and things that relate to their personal lives and their children's lives, and their experience, basically in these private contexts, and asking them to contribute it into this context that would become, more public, like in the form of an artwork that might, have some kind of audience. So I was thinking about, I guess a little bit related to the kinds of concerns you were talking about, although more in a kind of interpersonal way rather than in these layers of institutions, but the kind of vulnerability that I am kind of, I guess, opening up in for the people I'm asking for material from. Do they feel like sharing? What does it mean to share? I wanted to create space and make it clear that they can choose what feels right to share. It's not, there's no pressure to share particular kinds of things or particular types of material that they wouldn't want to make public. And then I guess another part is that I was interested in is what does it create? Can it create some kind of solidarity or sense of solidarity, even in this pretty abstract way, through making a 3D virtual environment is pretty abstracted from our lived everyday life. But in bringing these kind of creative materials together, what does it mean, or is it possible to create some kind of collaged or visually, use a visual approach to kind of combining our, different caretakers' experiences of, their bodies in space as they're kind of dealing with a child during this time period where there might not be family around, there might not be support around, not so much picturing any children, or even, there's some kids' voices in the distance, but mostly it's not about portraying this directly. It's more about trying to create a sense of focus and distraction and, visual stimulation, but also kind of boredom and repetition, organization, but also kind of chaos, all these things that always kind of intersect with each other when you're with a kid for a long time. Especially if you're with a kid for a long time on your own. So, how does this collaboration, what kind of space does it create for being together? Or what kind of space does it create for reflecting on this together? So I guess invisibility maybe is tied to kind of vulnerability and solidarity and shared, different types of shared space, kind of both through email or through the space of the game, through conversation, these different layers of possible shared spaces.
Yeah, it makes me think of this idea of collaboration, where I wonder in many of the projects I've done that were very collaborative, and there has been different spaces of collaboration from people that were support, just helping me with the expenses, or helping people that you don't necessarily acknowledge in projects you do, people who do the kind of work that it underlies a lot of our work, that you need them because they allow you to do some of it, but you probably cannot acknowledge all of them. Maybe actually cinema does it a little better than us, they have all of these names at the beginning and at the end of each film, from the very young assistant who just carries something to the director and the movie makers, etc.
And they have IMDb to kind of formalize.
Yeah, and then they have
the whole
these extremely large lists that just last for 5 minutes of credits. But I think in like performance art, but also in research, in academic research, but also in visual arts, etc. There are much more people that are actually support people that allow the work to happen and that are not acknowledged. And I'm thinking, what in these type of collaborations, what do people get from it? Why would they participate simply? I think about this a lot, because also in academia, in many of our experiments, we just ask people to come and do an experiment, spend an hour or two of their time. They're usually not paid for it. And you kind of like give an illusion that they would get some kind of information or reflexive time about their own practice and their own work or their own self, etc. But usually I'm not sure they do. Maybe they think they just participate into science or whatever. Sometimes you try to pay them and then it becomes a job. And so in what sense, there is a lot of complexity that goes from like paying people as these type of collaboration become just a job, versus asking them to participate into a participatory performance, for example, where in the case of your email and virtual reality space, it was like, send us please some photos and videos to participate into this artwork and make it happen. So I think in that sense, collaboration is always tricky, because you never know what you're really offering to people as an opportunity, or what is it they get from it.
Yeah, I think in all sorts of creative fields and in academic fields, there's a big kind of abstract exchange of resources and time and expertise that might have some, maybe for one party there's a real benefit, but I think the benefits are kind of abstract and intangible. And I guess people decide that it's worth it, obviously, because they do it, or, some people do it sometimes, but it's, maybe it's kind of like a long game that is not, it's not always about, at least for right or wrong, it's not always about being paid right away. It's about payment in other forms. I'm not really saying my opinion about whether that's good or not. It just seems like that's how it works. But I have a question for you. So it's interesting to hear about, doing collaborative, creative work, that as artists we're quite familiar with, but that might be really unfamiliar to some of your colleagues in your department who, might work in more kind of traditional academic ways. Is doing that work in that context, is that a way of, I'm guessing it's complicated, but is that a way of kind of platforming or bringing to the foreground some of the kind of sensitivities that we as artists hopefully have towards collaboration and the economies of these kinds of exchanges, to kind of put that into the milieu of these other, practitioners who don't necessarily think in that same way?
Yeah, I think we can learn both ways, basically. I think there's something about academia that is really interesting that I believe maybe the arts should learn from, is the idea of referencing. I think that's really brilliant. And I think in academia, nobody really pretends that they're reinventing the wheel. Everyone is kind of referencing each other and then building on top of other works. And you would never see a paper basically with no previous references to literature or to previous works by peers, etc. And I think that's very humbling and interesting practice. And that's a sort of collaboration, because you're kind of collaborating with the whole milieu, as you say, as of building on top of each other's knowledge and acknowledging what has happened before. I think in the arts, there's some kind of lack of that. We feel like we have to hold on to this idea of innovation and always making new from nothing. And sometimes that's a little bit of a, I think, a utopia. Lately, there has been this very, very famous French choreographer who has been accused of plagiarism, who had actually, and there has been this video who really shows his work. He's, you know, a director of a very famous choreographic center in France. His work and the work of another artist, female artist, way less famous, way less notorious, with these very strong parallels, like aesthetically very visible. And I think that what's lacking there, whether it's plagia or not plagia, I don't think that's necessarily, well, there's a conversation there, but I think that what's lacking is this idea of a valid collaboration or a valid referencing of what has been done before, and acknowledgement of inspiration, building on each other's work, etc. I think on the other hand, perhaps in academia could learn from the arts in this way in which work could be really layer in participation, audience participation, collaboration among other artists and peers, etc. I don't see that as necessarily completely lacking from academia, but I see that as a much more frequent practice in the arts, and perhaps that type of collaboration or open collaboration is really interesting and important. So it's kind of a both way, maybe, at least in the two areas in which I hang out. What about you? What do you think? Do you have an academic practice?
Yeah, I teach new media art at a number of institutions in the New York area. So I'm involved in making curriculums and teaching students and working in departments. One thing that struck me about what you're saying about referencing and artists kind of learn, that artists could learn, the art community could learn from the academic community in like making explicit the kind of interconnectedness of all the different work that we do. I think, well, two things came to mind. One is that, it seems to me that most fields of art are still pretty focused on, especially, more commercial fields of art, the idea of the kind of individual genius and, just like the modernist idea of like the Picasso or the Van Gogh that kind of reinvents their own visual language from nothing. And that's the kind of thing that should be celebrated, which is the individual, which I find to be a really boring and problematic and outdated way of thinking about what it means to make creative work. But another thing that I was telling these other guys that I used to work more in video and performance art, and now I've moved into kind of, I guess, what people call new media art, and art that uses and foregrounds technology a little more. And I find, and among other things, I find the new media art community it's very community oriented. And there is, there might not be as explicit of a referencing system, but people that are interested in, in technologies and open source and creative coding, they really do kind of, I think, do something like what you're describing. People, they work on each other's projects, they add code to each other's projects, they develop resources and tools that, they might use themselves, but they're also, explicitly to be shared and modified and developed by the community. So I think that's like an interesting analog, a place where something like that is happening in the creative community.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I absolutely agree with the value system in visual arts, at least, that is more about celebrating the individual artist as this isolated genius, which is I think a rhetoric that is actually quite neoliberal, and a rhetoric that you can find also in like Silicon Valley, this person who's invented this incredible system who can then become a millionaire because well deserved, obviously. Yeah, and I also agree that in the digital arts, or at least what I know of it, it's a little less of that, simply because there's also exactly some of the computing and the community of computing that has been built around massive collaboration and a history of open source, etc., has integrated that. But I also think it's because there isn't as much a market to be that celebrated type of genius who sells pieces for millions of dollars in digital arts. And I think that's for the best. But it's interesting because I was writing this, I'm in the process of writing a paper about AI artists, so people who use AI in their creative practice. And there has been some reminiscences of Sotheby's, etc., trying to sell AI arts for millions of dollars, and so bringing back that mentality of the lone genius that doesn't need collaborators or doesn't need referencing, etc., to create something completely crazy that deserves to be sold for $1 million. So bringing back that capitalist view of art into a world that was not necessarily framed this way. And it's really funny because that had massive backlashes, because a lot of the code that was used for these pieces, or for this piece that was sold very expensively, was not code that was created by that group of, I think it was a collective, 3 people. And a lot of the conversations that go on in that realm of AI and art is who is the author, because simply all of these algorithms come from mixing and matching and hacking lines of code that come from everywhere, that you kind of find a GitHub and then just clone that thing and then mix it up with something else and then clone. So who do you reference? Who are the people underlying that work? Who's the set of collaborator worldwide through that connection through GitHub and open source repositories of code, etc. That's an interesting place of asking this kind of questions as well. Like who does it rely on? And also, what do people get of it? I think it's a sense of community and belonging to, and like building on each other's work and releasing new algorithms, and then iterating on that and re-releasing them, etc., which is kind of inspiring.
I would cut in for a moment. I mean, part of what I feel I'm hearing from both of you is a lot of awareness of the ways in which context is tied to visibility or invisibility, and also that there's not always easy distinctions between these contexts. So between what we want to call academic versus artistic or not academic, between what we want to call personal and professional work, for example, in a project that involves children, or between different disciplines, in your example, Sarah, it's not always easy to distinguish, in part because many of us take part in multiple sort of communities at once. So when we're talking about them or the other thing, often we're implicated in that already. And it's a question of how we see that difference or differentiation between these different aspects of communities that we take part in. And I think the sort of ethical questions that are coming up about what it means to ask for contributions that involve, for example, representations of one's children, or the sort of ethics of who is or and isn't named, what kind of labor is visible and cared for and valued in different contexts. For me, all of this points to the sort of systemic questions of visibility and invisibility that underlie this question. Noting that sometimes invisibility also has a lot of power.
Yeah. I wasn't referring to, we perhaps invisibility sometimes is interesting as well. I think I was thinking about invisibility as of who you're not referencing, who your work relies on, without necessarily them being acknowledge or reference, etc., as a sort of domination, or a sort of basically exerting power of taking, not referencing, not acknowledging. But perhaps there are examples of invisibility as interesting examples.
Well, I was just thinking about the care involved in Daniel's use of acronyms, for example. If you were, if it was, you know, people who you're asking to contribute anonymously, these two examples are just really interesting together, I think, bring up the complexity of these questions. So thank you. So Daniel, did you have a final comment there?
Nope.
Okay.
Acknowledge
Thank
that.
you so much to both of you for taking part in this conversation. It really moved the question in a lot of different directions. We're excited to continue the conversation in Discord and in some of our upcoming events as the Provocations Project continues. So we will post your provocations along with this video and links to the venues where we can continue our conversation together.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was
Thanks
great.
so much. Really, really exciting. Thank you.